Podcasters Roundtable, round 101. All right, rolling on that second chunk of episodes. We hit 100. Let's go for the next 100. So we're at PR 200, 200 rounds. Ding, ding, ding. Who's gonna make it? Battle Royale. And I think it's the second time I've used Battle Royale in talking about the Roundtable. And I don't even watch wrestling, but back in the 80s, I'm old enough to remember Battle Royales. Okay. Stats. That's what it said. The title of this thing was just called Stats. So that's what we're going to talk about. It's more, we've talked about stats before on Roundtable, and I think it was more around like accurate measurement of stats, and we'll talk a little bit about that. This time it's a little bit more personal. It is more like, how do you use stats as a podcaster in your workflow? And that's the focus, but we can start there and go anywhere. And the people that are going to help us do that are the Roundtablers. Starting off with co-host extraordinaire, Daniel J. Lewis. Welcome back.
Thank you. I have more than one downloader from my podcasts, and I'm grateful for that stat.
Well, it's you, but that's cool. It's nice to love yourself a little bit. Whoa, Dave Jackson, he's just popped up and wedged himself apart and the screen open, and I heard The Simpsons play. It was great. Dave Jackson, welcome.
Well, yeah, glad to be here. Who knew a really old Camry would do a 95 miles an hour and not even vibrate? So life is good.
Dave risking tickets at life and limb, apparently, of everybody for the Roundtable. So we appreciate that here. We're glad you're back.
Glad to be safely.
All right, first time Roundtabler, Stephen, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
This is your first time, right?
It is my first time.
Okay.
You're getting my cherry, man.
Oh man, all right. Well, we get a lot of those here. So that's how I designed this show, selfishly. Now, if you're watching the video version, and you should be on youtube.com/podcastersroundtable, there is a ton of medals behind Stephen. Stephen, what do you do to get all those medals? I have to know.
I am a long distance runner. I like to run anything longer than the marathon. So anything over 26.2 miles is for me.
So is that somewhere between ultra and marathon?
Anything over 26.2 is ultra.
What's the longest you've run?
55 miles.
Oof.
I did 2 weekends ago.
Oh,
and
2 weekends ago.
100-miler here coming up in a couple months. So.
100, that's awesome.
It would take me 2 weekends, no, probably more, to run 55 miles.
That's awesome. So what is your podcast, Stephen?
My podcast is the Heartland Running Podcast. It's myself, my 2 great co-hosts, and we just kind of geek out about anything running.
Right on. All right. And returning Roundtabler, Shawn, welcome back.
Thanks, Ray. It's always an honor to be on the Roundtable. And I am Shawn Thorpe with Blueberry Support, amongst a number of other podcasty-related things. And, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of stats is I really just don't ever care to look at mine. So,
So Shawn, do you have what's your show?
I do kind of somewhat regular podcasts, sort of regular with my wife, called Hyper Nonsense. And we've been doing it actually off and on since 2006. And it's kind of an old school podcasting 1.0 show. And we do it for fun. It's a hobby.
Podcasting 1.0, what does that mean? You started because of the year you started, or what is 1.0?
No, I just mean that it doesn't have, I don't know, if someone decides they want to start learning to podcast in 2017, there's a lot of talk of avatars and plans and all this kind of stuff. And, back in 05 and 06, you kind of, a lot of people anyway, us, we just started because we thought it would be fun. And we never really changed our outlook on it. So it has an audience, but it is a small but dedicated audience, and we do love them, but I don't spend a lot of time poring over stats on that show.
Awesome. Well, the first question I had up here in my notes, I did make notes today, was when was the last time you looked at your stats? So for Shawn, you can answer that, but it doesn't sound like it's recently.
Probably not. I think I just happened to glance at them maybe within the last couple of weeks, because one of the things that happens a lot of time with the support work I do with Blueberry is sometimes I need to look at my own account to try to get an understanding of what's happening in someone else's account. So sometimes I just happen to log in there and I'll go, oh, well, what are my stats looking like? And then I look at them and they're pretty much the same as the last time, however many months ago that was.
So it would be dumb to ask who you use for your stats.
Yeah.
But I won't assume.
But I will say, I used Blueberry Stats for as long as Blueberry Stats have existed. And that was, many years before I joined the support team. So.
It's time for me to just take a left turn, massive, take Dave's Camry and just shove it off the road, because as I'm reminded of something that I think that Shawn deals with or has answered a lot in forums or wherever I see this all the time, any of the groups, Google Plus, Facebook. Squarespace and stats and Blueberry.
Yes.
Right? So someone has a podcast on Squarespace, whether they're hosting there or they're just using it for their website, and they want stats. Is that doable? How does that work?
Yes, it is. And kind of the full story on that is apparently Squarespace's analytics, at least for podcasts, kind of suck. I've never seen them, so I don't really know how bad they are. But there is a workaround that actually a Squarespace user figured out for implementing. I mean, it could work for really any third-party stats. So it definitely works for Blueberry, but it could work for PodTrack as well. And I'm not sure if there are any other third-party stat suppliers right now. I feel like I just heard of a new one, but regardless, the methodology is there, but it is a pretty serious workaround that is not for someone who does not consider themselves at least a little tech savvy, but it can be done.
Right. Okay. I think we'll get into that a little bit more about like where to get stats. And this is one of the things you might run into. It's not easy if that's where you're hosting. So sometimes you have to make decisions about, I guess, where you want your website or your host versus your stats, stuff like that. So that's cool. That applies to every podcaster when they're making these decisions, or when they've made a decision later on, they decide to want to add something. But Steven, when was the last time you checked out your stats?
I glanced at them today, but generally I check them once a week.
Yeah. And so what are you looking for?
Really, for me, I'm looking for any kind of pattern in the stats. I mean, I'm sure it's this way in most podcasting.
We got like a Cylon issue thing with your mic. It's breaking up. So I don't know if you can, whatever that problem was we had in the pre-show, it's back.
Oh, crap.
Do you have a USB mic?
No, not with me.
Do whatever you did to fix it, and hopefully it'll last. We'll get back to that question. Daniel, when was the last time you looked at your stats?
This morning.
Not because of this round, I'm hoping.
Oh, okay. This morning.
Okay.
It's actually part of my daily routine to look at my stats. But no, I'm not one of those like that. Well, what I do is I've bookmarked all of my stats from everything, whether it's affiliates or website browsers or different parts, YouTube stats, everything is in a single folder inside of Chrome. And then what I do in the mornings or so, it's not the first thing I do, but sometime in the morning, I'll go to that folder in my bookmarks. I right click on it and I click Open All in New Window. And then it opens all, how many tabs? 21 tabs in a new window.
Oh.
And it takes a minute to load or so, but it loads much faster on my newer Mac that I got a couple years ago than the Mac I had years before that. And I'm not looking at the exact numbers. I'm looking for trends. So I'm not really obsessing, even though I do check my stats every day, and it's part of my daily routine. It's, for me, I want to see, does anything stand out? How does it look like things are performing? And every now and then, like Google, for example, with the Google website stats, where you can see very easily, you can see your daily stats, number of visitors, and it's always very cyclical. It goes down on the weekends, goes up during the weekdays, down on the weekends, up on the weekdays. And that's what I look for. I want to see, though, is there a big spike one of those days or a big drop one of those days? Sometimes, and I think I actually did it just this morning or yesterday morning, I hovered my mouse over one of those days, so it showed me how many people visited my website in that day. And I was blown away because I had no idea the number was anywhere near that number. And that's because it has been growing over time, and I hadn't really been paying attention to the exact number. The same thing happens with other stats that I look at. I don't really remember the number. I just kind of know if today's number is close to yesterday's number.
And that was one of the things I was interested in knowing, like why are you looking, right? So you gave us that, but something curious came up there because the title of this just said stats. Sometimes when I know we are Podcasters Roundtable, sometimes I will define in the title podcast stats or podcast. You were kind of referring to website stats there. So when I bring up stats, it doesn't, I didn't put podcast there. So we have a podcast that's on a website, so it's related, but yeah, it's just something I wasn't thinking completely about. It could be podcast stats. It could be other stats that are related to podcasts. So that's your website too.
So yeah, here's the list of the different types of stats, not all the individual links, but the different types that I look at. Blueberry, Libsyn, iTunes Site Manager, Stitcher, Spreaker, FeedBurner, YouTube, Google Play Music, and my active campaign email list subscribers, and then the website stats from Google Analytics.
So that, since you said the FB word, Richard Gunther, who I asked to be on, but he couldn't make it. But he had good questions. And one thing he asked was why Daniel says FeedBurner numbers are bad. Says he hears you say that all the time. And if he listens to the rest of us, he probably hears the same thing or has heard the same thing. So what do you say? Why are FeedBurner numbers bad?
FeedBurner gives a couple different numbers, or actually a few different numbers. So join with me, children, as we go into the depths of FeedBurner's inaccuracies. When you look at your FeedBurner numbers, if you click into it and if you've enabled stats, it will look at how many times an enclosure has been downloaded, or an enclosure is, in other words, an episode has been downloaded from the feed. It looks at how many times an item has been visited through the feed. So like if someone taps to visit your episode webpage from looking at your RSS feed, such as in Feedly or in the iOS 11 podcast app, you can now visit the episode webpage through there. And it also tracks how many subscribers there are to the feed. So the item downloads, the views, the clicks, those numbers are really worthless. They're so far from accurate. It's not even worth considering the number at all because it's not factoring in everything. Like if you look at your download stats there, it's not factoring in your website plays because your website is not powered by the RSS feed. It's powered by your website. So it's not factoring that in. It's also not doing proper filtering and cross IP checking and all this stuff that Blueberry, Libsyn, and these other hosting companies do and filter out. So the download number is completely inaccurate. The click-throughs and views are almost worthless, really, to know. There's not much you can really do with those numbers or know. The main thing, though, is the subscriber numbers. And that's the number I check when I load my FeedBurner stats. And I'm using FeedBurner in its raw state. Every single feature inside of FeedBurner is turned off. And that's the only way I would recommend using FeedBurner is if you turn off all the features, especially SmartCast. So that one number, the subscriber number, the reason that's not accurate is, for one thing, it's only the number of subscriptions in one day. So if I look at my FeedBurner subscriber stats, I'm going to see that dip on the weekends. And it looks like, oh no, I lost 400 subscribers over the weekend. Oh boy, shoo. I got them back on Monday, but oh no, I lost them again on Saturday. What am I doing? My podcast is horrible. So it's misleading because it's not a measurement of how many subscribers you have. It's a measurement of how many things checked your RSS feed on that day.
Right. And I guess in theory, you could probably keep like some extensive spreadsheet and, go over a month and average it out. But I mean, yeah. I think that's the most important thing there is to understand that what is it counting and why is it dipping and going up and down is because it's checking it that day, right?
And so the other problem there is just because something checks in a day, no, let me back up. Just because something doesn't check in a day doesn't mean that person's not subscribed. It just means that thing didn't check the RSS feed.
Right.
And it's very possible, I think probably very likely, because FeedBurner has been pretty much almost abandoned by Google, except they did update it a couple years ago. But it's very possible that if you have a mobile device, for example, that when you're at home, your mobile device is on one IP address. When you get in the car and leave your home Wi-Fi, your mobile device has another IP address. Then when you're at the public library, your phone probably connects to the Wi-Fi there, so it has a different IP address. Then you go to the coffee shop, different IP address. So all of these places, depending on how often your podcast app checks for new episodes, it's refreshing that RSS feed. And each time it's doing that, it might be doing it from a different RSS feed, depending on how much you move around. And nothing seems to indicate that Google has properly accounted for that, since FeedBurner's basically abandoned. So most likely, one person could account for multiple subscriptions, air quotes around that, for your stats. So that's why I say even the number inside FeedBurner is really worthless. And what I look at FeedBurner for is, again, the trend. I want to see, is it going up, and by what percentage is it going up relative to a week ago or a month ago?
You can't really do that with FeedBurner though. Without keeping track, like I said, you can't really tell. You can't see trends because it's in FeedBurner. Yet you can see trends in proper stats.
Well, you can see, if you go into the FeedBurner stats dashboard, you can see the little graph that shows how many, quote, subscribers, unquote, you had each day. And you can look at the beginning of the line and look at the end of the line over a 30-day period, or you can look at it over a 7-day period, or all time, or you can export it and then do your own charts and stuff. Right. But like for me, for example, if I look at my all time, I see a constant growth pattern. But what I also see there are some significant spikes, like the biggest percentage-wise spike, looking at my feed was, there was a big one in 2011 or so when I was on Cliff Ravenscraft's show talking about podcast movement, or PodCamp, Cincinnati. Boy, it was so long ago, I couldn't even say it. There was some other big spike in mid-2014, but besides that, it's just consistent organic growth.
Right. Dave, when was the last time you looked at your stats?
I check them the same time when I'm uploading the new episode. Before I upload it, I go over and I look at my stats, and I have it in Libsyn.
Libsyn only?
Yeah, well, whatever I'm doing.
Well, no, I mean, how many places do you have stats?
Well, I have stats in everything. I have stats in Omni Studio. I try it like every platform. I have Whooshka, Omni Studio, Podbean, Pinecast is another one I've been playing with. They're all, some of them are worse than others. But usually for me, the ones that are on things like Whooshka and Pinecast and Podbean, those are shows that are what I will call test shows. Bernie the Cat is not a serious podcast. I hate to pop your bubble, but it's not something I just did to test that platform. But for the School of Podcasting, I basically go in my Libsyn stats and I add up the last 4 episodes at that time. And that just gives me a little snapshot. And I compare it to the last time I did that, and I go, is the number bigger or smaller? And I am a little bit of an Excel geek, so I have a trend line based on those numbers, and I can see that it's for the last, however long I've been doing the spreadsheet, the trend line is going up. So I'm happy, and I kind of like Daniel. I'm looking to see if all of a sudden the numbers just drop for no reason, or they go up for some. It's like, well, wait a minute, let's go back and look and see, and then I might be able to either spot an episode that really, really resonated with the audience, or one that I thought was going to resonate, maybe didn't as much. So that's about it. I don't obsess about them. I'm trying to think of the other shows. Yeah, like the Podcast Rodeo show, I don't even look at the stats. Right. I'm just having fun with that show.
I think what we hear a lot of times is that people's stats flatline. So, you guys both say your stats keep going up and up. You rock. That's awesome. But I think a lot of people find a plateau and it levels off. And then people start asking, how do I grow my show? Right. And that's the biggest thing I can always get probably good downloads if I put, 100 ways to grow your show on the title. But, do you ever see your shows level off, Dave? Do you see that happen? And you've been podcasting a long time. Man.
Well, if I look at the, if I look at it, it's like a roller coaster. It
Right.
goes, I'll have like a month where things are just going up, and then I'll have 2 or 3 weeks where it's down a little bit, and then it goes up a little more, and it goes down a little. So it's kind of a 2 steps forward or 3 steps forward, 1 step back kind of scenario. So, but the trend line based on that is going up. And when I say going up, it's not a hockey stick. It's, I guess I could calculate it, but it's, it's nothing crazy. It's, if this is flat, it's, I don't know, if 9 and 3 are on a clock, this is more kind of 8 and 2.
Anyone who has Libsyn stats has that trend line. Is that ever, sometimes that doesn't seem accurate to me, but.
Well, for me, I always want to look at a trend that's longer than the month. And that's where it gets, I always end up with 2 trend lines, and I scratch my head and go, all right, I'll look at that later. And then and that's kind of why I have my own little trend line for that. But yeah, if I look at a month or 3 months, it's fine. When I go to a year, I end up with 2 trend lines, and that's where I'm like, and then again, I just look at, and just looking at it, you can see where, for me, I publish weekly. And so every, 7 days, I have this big giant spike, right. And I can just tell, if I look at one right now for the past year, and I look at the beginning of the graph, and then I look at the one, if I look at the left side of the graph where I started, and the right side of the graph, the last week, is that one taller than that? And I go, yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm not looking for hockey stick growth. I just want to know, is it growing? And it is. So that's where I'm like, and then there are other stats. Like my last episode I just did, I didn't think if it was going to resonate at all. It was one of those where you hit publish and you kind of go, I'm not sure if people are going to get this or not. And I had like 3 or 4 people email me like, oh man, that's exactly what I was thinking. So that to me sometimes is more of a stat than how many downloads I get. It's how many people that tweet me or email me or whatever and say that
engagement.
Was a good show.
You want engagement outside of the trend line. You want engagement.
Yeah.
Awesome.
For my Once Upon a Time podcast, you were asking about stagnating. It's going down. And consistently going down.
The TV show, I would imagine, does it have to do with the popularity of the TV show, right?
Yes, definitely. Because the TV show popularity is going down. The TV show actually ended this last season, and now we're getting a spinoff, otherwise known as the 7th season of the TV show. Fans of the show or non-fans will get that joke. But I've seen that our peak for the podcast was in season 2. I think that was also the peak for the show, but any fans of the show know that season 2 was also a really rough season for the show. Ever since then, I think it's been a consistent downward trend of the stats for that. And it's because we're attached to a show that's going down. I think maybe other TV show fan podcasts might be going up because, like, I don't know, Game of Thrones, maybe increasing in popularity, maybe.
This Is Us would be a good example of that.
That's Dave's favorite show.
I turn it on and cry like a baby.
All right, we got to make sure we don't start the This Is Us fan podcast right here at the Roundtable. Steven, where do we leave off? Where did we leave off when we lost? We still have mic issues. Nah, it's not working. We hear you, but we only hear ourselves. I don't know. Toss on your built-in mic. Anything will work. Actually, at this point, like, try something else. Yeah, you can reconnect, but it seems to have a time limit on it. I don't know. Back in the day, hold on, let's check these out. If you're on video right now, this is a reason you should get to video. I'm going to make actually bad for audio people. You should check it out. We love you first, but look at this.
And an awesome little headset from.
This is a Plantronics DSP 400. It is the newest model, 2017. This thing goes way back to the early Twit days. This is old, man. This is something we mail to guests. It's still relevant to interviewees at work because it's better than what they have, right? And they can send it back in the mail real easily. It does the job. And so that thing used to be famous on This Week in Tech for having the Cylon effect. So after about like 45 minutes, it would do what you're hearing in Steven's audio, and it's having this weird digital Cylon effect. So anyways, that reminded me of that. So that's for the podcast 1.0 crew. Shawn?
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we do hear you.
All
right. Probably sounds like garbage, but it's just my webcam mic.
Hey, this is a good example of just get the audio. Like, it sounds better than what we had just because we had technical issues. So we're good.
Right. don't know what was going on there. Never had that
know,
issue before.
That's live. We have it. It happens every couple rounds.
And everyone needs to know Steven normally has the voice of God. But because he's using his built-in microphone on his computer right now, that's why he sounds horrible.
His stats are sure to fall.
They're gonna,
our stats are going to fall. Our stats are going to fall. Anyways, where do we leave off? You were answering a question when we hit the wall there.
Well, you were talking about when do I check my stats? And I was saying I check them usually once a week. I think Daniel kind of touched on it. I'm looking for trends. I'm just looking for a slow, steady growth, not explosive growth. And then you guys were talking about like plateauing, and I'll see that too. And then it's like, okay, it's time to get a big name guest on, because that'll drive in a lot of traffic. Most won't stay, but some do. So it's kind of like you go up a little bit, plateau out, then just go up a little bit. And that's
when you're looking at your trend and you see something stand out, what do you do with that information?
Well, if I know why, I'll try to repeat that. Sometimes it goes up and you're like, I didn't really like that episode. I don't know why it rose so high, but generally go back. I'll ask, we have a pretty tight knit Facebook group. We can ask them, what was it that you really liked about this episode? And hopefully we can find out what worked.
Yeah, that's a huge one. That's a huge one. So what I like is you're taking action on your stats. You see them level off and you think, oh, let me shake it up a little bit, right? And let's get a big guest. And it sounds like maybe that works for, like you said, it has the exact effect of getting more attention that you might not have had before. And a couple of those people will stick around. And that's how we grow, like one listener at a time, literally. But I like this question of how the heck does anyone know? Dave, you said spikes and you see it go up and down. And in Dave's case, we know when you release an episode, the podcatchers are going to download it automatically. For people who have their things set to download automatic, and you're going to see that number go up over like that for the first day or two, and then it's going to dip back down. But how do you track down what the heck is happening? I will say right now, I had like 3 to 5x growth on the Podcaster Studio. I know that's not real. There's no way that show is getting 12 to 15,000 downloads. So something's going on, but guess what? I couldn't tell you what. I mean, Daniel and I, we probably think it's some players loading it somewhere. That typically can be what happens, but it's nothing that I've created. So if this could happen, say someone links to your podcast and it puts it in a player. I mean, like all of a sudden, my Libsyn stats, which are fantastic. Libsyn is known for having great stats, Blueberry, PodTrack. I can't rely on them. Like, how the heck am I going to track that down? So that's what I'm going through right now. But when you guys see things, and if you can diagnose my issue, that'd be fantastic.
Well, with Libsyn stats, you can go in and you have your little spiky thing. We're going to use technical terms like that. The little spiky thing.
Graph.
And you have a little ball at the top of that. If you click on that ball, it'll expand to show you out of, if I did today, here's what you downloaded on September 21st. And you could go in and see that, okay, there's my latest episode. It got X amount of downloads. And wow, here's my whole back catalog is getting downloaded. So that'll give you an idea. And then there are things, Cale Nelson does Ham Radio 360, and he had a really popular blog about whatever Ham Radio or somebody else did, some influencer in that realm, and put a link directly to his website. And so he could go in and see that, and he was getting, I think he said like 600 downloads on a podcast that was like 3 months old. So all of a sudden it had spiked, and then it was down to, kind of doing nothing. And then all of a sudden there's this big thing, and he was able to go in and see that that's where it was coming from. So that's not always the case, but
printing this to Bane's Naughty Bits in the chat room said, will the upcoming hardcore Apple stats cause mass podcast suicides? We'll probably talk about the suicides in a moment, but I do want to mention the podcast stats coming to Apple brings something that right now besides the obvious consumption analytics to see how much of an episode is consumed. I know we'll talk about that probably soon. But something that the big three in podcast stats, Libsyn, Blueberry, and PodTrack, something that they don't have, that I think maybe some of the fringe newbies do have, although their algorithms aren't quite refined, is to be able to show you that actual per episode trending information, like to see this episode after 30 days got this many downloads, then this episode after 30 days got this many downloads. Like Dave is doing that manually. In Apple Podcasts, actually I'll share my screen here because I've got the slide right up. inside of Apple Podcasts, the Podcast Connect. This is a slide from their presentation at WWDC. So the actual information might be a little bit different, but if you want the slide number, if you search for the WWDC presentation, this is slide, oh, I don't know what slide number this is anymore, but it's somewhere around, oh, there we go, 76 if you want to check it in the PDF slides. But what they show is they do show several episodes in a graph laid out across a number of days, and all of the episodes having the same start point. So day 0, they got this many downloads. Day 2, they all got this many downloads. Day 3, they all get this many downloads, all the way up to, it looks like, day 60. So you can see how quickly are each of your episodes reaching that plateau point. And in their example here, you can see at day 22 is when all of the episodes reach that plateau point. Some episodes continue to go a little bit higher, but this will be really cool because then you can see how your per episode growth changes to know that, wow, I'm hitting 100 downloads in a day when before it took 5 days to hit 100 downloads. Or, you know, my next episode hits 100 downloads, or it hits on day 1, it hits 105 downloads. So it's not the mythical downloads per time number, because that's not completely accurate. But it is letting you see how quickly is your podcast episode reaching a particular number. And
which to me sounds like some kind of gauge on subscribers, right? Because that number's hitting those, you know, if it's hitting a number fast enough, it's because it's being auto downloaded by someone who's hit subscribe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also it's letting you see like the maturity point. That's kind of it, is you get to see how quickly does the episode reach a particular maturity point.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, we did mention, obviously, we went into the Apple stats. We should hit the chat a little bit. So someone asked in the chat about that, and they were asking, will Apple data be good or bad, useful or not? Who's excited for the Apple data? I am, because the one thing that I want are statistically significant, considering that most of your podcast audience, for most podcasters, doesn't apply to everybody, comes from Apple, the app specifically a lot of times, but from Apple that you can measure from one place, and length of listen, which is critical in my perspective for really knowing how you're doing. You know, at work we have actual ads we put in there, and I mean, it's our own stuff. It's promotional, it's marketing, whatever. We would know better where to place those. That's for sure. We could see if at the point where we put in some promotional thing, we break from content, are people dropping off? You know, YouTube gives you this kind of data, and it really helps. Now, it's going to be depressing for a lot of people. A lot of people are going to see that their 1,000 downloads, you got maybe 300 of those. They don't stick around past 2 minutes. I mean, so, you know, good, I think, overall for podcasting. Is going to be a little hard on some podcasters.
I think it's going to separate the men from the boys.
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to tell you. And the thing is, it's not like it's public, right? So,
right,
it's no one's going to know it. You're still going to say, people could still say they had X amount of downloads, and they could, in theory, prove it. But then people are going to say, well, show me your audience retention numbers, because that's actually, YouTube figured this out. YouTube, you know, they still show you a view count, but that's not what matters at all on YouTube. It all is about audience retention and watch time, right? Who cares if you had 1 million people watch 2 seconds of your video? I'd rather have 100 people watch the whole 2 minutes, right? Which is better. So it's going to be all about watch time. So Apple's going to give us some of that. If you don't know that, in theory, we're going to get length of listen. We'll see how that works out. Daniel, you have a screen up.
Yeah, this is the previous slide. So slide 75 in their PDF presentation, which I posted in the chat room for anyone watching. And it will probably be in the show notes too, so you can follow along. You'll see the same kind of thing, like what Ray was just describing. You will always see a drop off in the first couple seconds or so, probably. You'll probably always see a drop wherever you do any kind of sponsorship or very long call to action. You'll always see a drop off at the end, as people are deciding, oh, you're starting to wrap up. You know, these are the people who leave during the credits of the movie, those evil people. And
we have to do what Marvel does, right? We got to sneak in extra stuff at the end.
Yeah, exactly. and you'll always see, in general, the trend go down the longer your episode goes, not is, but goes, the more people drop off.
That's important. I don't know if you guys caught that, but it's, a 3-minute episode is still going to see decline.
Exactly.
Right, over even an hour and 3-minute episode.
So what I worry is going to happen is the public radio people are going to get this data and they're going to say, oh, well, the perfect length of a podcast episode isn't 22 minutes. It's actually 13 and a half minutes because look at this data that we see. And my response to that would be, no, your shows are best at 13 minutes, not everyone else's.
Yep. So I'm thumbs up. What else? Is that the only stat? Shawn, is that the only stat we're getting from Apple?
As far as I know, I'm not completely versed in everything, but I think we've covered all of the really important stuff.
Yeah, you'll get some segmentation with it probably. Like you might be able to see, okay, everyone from Brazil, how much of my episode do they listen to?
Right,
or
segment of that
look
rotation.
of people who are subscribed versus people who are not subscribed.
Yeah.
And some of this information we have just in different platforms, and that's the big difference. This is going to be Apple. I mean, I'm looking at my Stitcher stats, and I'm going to say maybe 3% of my audience comes from Stitcher, and that in itself is eye-opening because I have one episode that the completion rate for people who listened longer than 15 seconds is 52%. That's when you go, ouch. Ow. So I think that's where some people, and I'm with Daniel, I'm afraid everybody's all of a sudden everybody's going to do a 7-minute podcast. And I'm no, because
seasons.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
There's a lot of hype right now. I've talked to a few people who are really thinking that, well, now that there's this support for these season tags, within the Apple Osphere, that, well, now they have to do a podcast in seasons. It's like, you don't have to do that unless it's relevant. That's the only time you should do it.
Yeah. Because to me, if you listen to any late night TV show, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, whoever, they all do 7-minute interviews. Because I've heard a few people that'll make a joke like, hold on, we got another 7 minutes or whatever. And if you think about it, all those interviews are typically pretty lame. It's, tell me a story about your kids on vacation. Okay, let's roll the clip. Thanks for coming. See you. Bye.
Yeah. And that's the thing about, stats. And we got some conversation in the chat about obsessing over stats. And you have to be careful how much you let that control the content, right?
Exactly.
You put that content first. And yeah, the stats can give you some guidance. Steven said, like, if he sees a flat line, maybe he'll bring on a big guest. But don't dramatically change your show. Don't take your 40-minute show and cut into a 7-minute show if that's not what you want it to be, or, talk to your audience. And, you want to make a change like that, you should probably talk to your audience. Steven, are you excited? Did you know these stats are coming from Apple? Or are you stoked about that? Or
yeah, I knew they were coming. I listened to all your shows. I feel like I'm in the Valley of the Giants here. Sorry, I don't have my voice of God for you, but
that's how we keep the little man down, right? I actually have a setting that makes the guest audio not as good as ours.
But no, I've been keeping up. I do not. Well, okay, I have a question.
Cool.
How many shows did it take before you stopped obsessing over your stats? I'd say for me, it was probably 15, 16 before I was like, I'll just look at them once in a while. So I was kind of curious where you guys were at.
Why? Well, before we move from that, tell me, why did that change for you? What changed it?
Just you get sick of looking at them and worrying about, I only got, I got 10 fewer downloads this week. Right. And it's like, well, so what? It doesn't
wisdom happened. You realize that it's futile to obsess over 10 more or 10 less, or you realize it's not going to have hockey stick growth. You've been watching for the last 15 episodes and no explosion happened, right? So you're going to check in once in a while and maybe be pleasantly surprised if you see something crazy. But for me, it's everyone who starts, you're going to upset. You want to see, I put something out there, or is anyone listening, right? And it's super exciting when that number goes by 2 or 5 or 25, you go out of your mind, right? Like you hit your email list. Hey, we're grown. We're, so
that's fun because when you first start off and you get 10 downloads and the next one you get 15, it looks huge.
It's motivating. Yeah.
You know, and you're like,
it
oh,
is
holy
huge.
cow.
It is huge because you're saying something and people are checking it out.
And then the problem is if you lose then 2 of that, you go down to 13. Again, it looks gigantic because it's whatever at that point, 40% of your audience or something like that. So I think that's maybe why new podcasters get a little hung up on it, because any change is going to be, it doesn't take anything to double your audience. I went from 4 to 8. And again, Emily makes a good point. You know, when we say 4 to 8, those are people.
Yep.
They're not just numbers. So then that is something to be excited over. But I think that's also why a new podcaster can kind of get a little obsessed over that, because any little change is going to make a huge difference on your graph.
And there's and that's the flip side, I think, is that we don't give up, but we don't obsess as much. And later on, that number becomes 100 or 1,000. And I think at some point you pull back because you do start to just see numbers at some point. I think, or you see 1,000, and 1,000 when you started would have been insane to you. And now it becomes sort of normalized. And then, like Emily said, you realize at some point you're like, whoa, that's 1,000 real people. And when do you realize that? When someone says it to you, like in a tweet, when you connect the human to the number, and then you change again. You think those numbers, you're like, oh my gosh. And then it almost gets scary because you're like, wait, there's 1,000 people in a room listening to me every week. It's crazy.
That's one of the reasons I really like reading the podcast reviews in my podcast, as well as getting to know the podcasts that my audience hosts. It's because it's now, I feel like reading those reviews for me is getting me to know my audience even better than direct emails from my audience. And maybe I'm just weird with that. But like, I'll discover these amazing podcasts my audience are hosting themselves, or I'll discover incredible niches or really creative cover art or these incredible things that these are people out there, and realize that public speakers, pastors, many of them would do all kinds of crazy things to try and get half your audience into their building on a regular basis. And you might even have more influence than the most, quote, influential people, unquote, that you're directly connected with.
Bangs in the chat says, I expect many podcasters to be very unhappy with the release of Apple stats, which would be ridiculous. I get it, right? Like, it's disappointing to you to find out that your 1,000 is really 200 because people aren't sticking around. But hopefully, you know, do you want to be fooled? Do you want to fool yourself? I mean, then you just don't look at your stats or at some point. Like, why would you be unhappy of reality? I get why.
Reminds me of when I was in a band and somebody would take a video of it, and you actually get to hear what you sound like and what you look like. And you're like, ooh, that was kind of flat. And ooh, that was, you know, it's really going to be who has the attitude. You know, Daniel was talking about episodes coming to maturity. It's going to see if podcasters can come to maturity and go, you know what, maybe I do need to tweak this a little bit. Because I think some of us, it's art, man. It's don't make me change my art. So, which is fine, but just don't get upset when you're doing a 3-hour show with 15 minutes worth of material.
Yeah. And that's the beauty, is like, it's still your decision, man. It's still your podcast.
Exactly.
Do what you want. Like, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters.
Yeah, I think you need to remember why you started your show. You know, we've had some big guests on and our numbers exploded, but we never heard anything back. We never got any feedback. We've had other episodes where the numbers were half, but we've gotten tons of, hey, thank you for that show. It's just what I needed to hear at that time. And that makes it worth it. Because, I mean, I don't make a living podcasting. It's my hobby. So just, I would say, remember why you started your show.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, because it can, I think, again, in the numbers, these things get lost. The people get lost. The reason you started gets lost. People don't want to change things, because it's almost like having the job you have as a teenager, and you got promoted a couple times, you make good money, and you're like, I don't want to leave the job because I make good money, right? And you get stuck, right? And a podcaster can get stuck too, settling into like a comfort zone, and they don't want to. They're scared of those stats going down, almost, right?
And I think sometimes we get so focused on the stats, we forget about the impact that you're making. On the way home from Pittsburgh, I was listening to Harry Duran, Podcast Junkies. He was interviewing Natalie Ekdahl. This ties in, who told a story about how her daughter listened to Daniel's Once podcast. And she had sent in some feedback And Daniel then mentioned it on the show, and Natalie explains how all of a sudden she thought there was something very wrong because her 15-year-old daughter screamed like she had dropped something on her foot or something, and it was because Daniel had actually mentioned her on the show. So you do have an impact on people. I think we forget that sometimes because we're, our stats went down, a wee bit. Yeah, but of the people, let's look at instead of looking how far it went down, don't forget the fact that stat is still based on something green or blue or yellow. There are people listening, and the people that are listening, you are having an impact, because otherwise they wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But Dave, the voice of the podcaster here, but Dave, if I don't have enough downloads, I can't make as much money from a sponsor.
And then that ties right into what I was going to say, because that would be kind of your fault, right? And because you're not doing the job of explaining the power of podcasting. As Dave says, one subscriber probably equals, I don't know, 1,000 website visitors, maybe, because people come to a website maybe once, they leave. One subscriber means something completely different in a podcast, even means something completely different than YouTube. YouTube, you can have subscribers, and I think people use the subscribe button like a like button. We don't have our like button. I want one. We didn't get that in iOS 11, did we? Come on. I want the like button. Let's do that, Apple. But people subscribe to a podcast because they want to hear the next episode and the one after it and one after that. So when you get someone to press subscribe, it means so much more, because part of that podcasting is not easy. It's not easy to produce necessarily. It's certainly not easy to do on a regular basis over time, but it's still not the easiest thing to get. You have to work a little bit. So that subscriber is usually so much more powerful than one of anything else that you're measuring on the web.
And even if you are looking at the dollars of things, let me use myself as a customer example of something else. At Podcast Movement 2016, someone introduced me to this guy called Mike Morrison. He hosts the Membership Guys podcast. I have a podcast membership website for podcasters, Podcaster Society. And I thought, a podcast about membership sites. Yeah, I want to check this out. So I checked it out. After meeting this guy personally, I checked out his podcast, started listening, and liked it, appreciated the value, heard him talk about he has a membership site for membership site owners. So what's a meta guy like me going to do? I have a podcast about podcasting. I'm going to join a membership site about membership sites. Duh, of course. Why not? So I joined it. So there, I've become a paying customer. And then Mike advertises, hey, we're going to do this thing in conjunction or co-located at Social Media Marketing World that we're going to do a membership marketing intensive. Buy this ticket for this separate event. And we're offering it to our membership site members first at a discount before we offer it to our podcast listeners. I jumped on that thing right away. There were only 12 guys there, or 12 people there, and I got to be one of them, and I learned so much from that. And then there came the opportunity to join the membership site as a yearly member instead of a monthly member and then save. And I decided, yeah, I get enough value from it. I'm going to go ahead and commit to a full year at a time. So I signed up for that. So the point is, I'm one person, and I've now represented hundreds of dollars, if not maybe even thousands, because I've referred other people to the same website. I've referred Dave. I've referred, I know at least 5 other friends who have joined because of my referral to the site. And I was one person responsible for all this income to that podcaster.
And why did you refer him?
Because of the value I get from him.
That's it. Exactly. And I was going to switch the back end of the school of podcasting. I was in the middle of this thing, and I was trying to figure out which was the best tool. And Daniel goes, oh, this guy has this cool PDF. It breaks down, all these different things. And I signed up for that one piece of information. And from there, I was like, wow, this is really cool. So it all starts with value. And Mike's a great guy. I met him at Podcast Movement. Actually, the last 2 years I've run into him. So he's a great guy.
So we talk about, I think someone alluded to sort of the big ones for getting stats, Blueberry, Libsyn, Podtrack. But why? How do we know? Good stats versus bad stats. How do we know these are the places to get them? Like, Shawn, why would I trust Blueberry stats?
I think the first thing to look at is the stats provider IAB compliant. And
that's new though. So
that is new, but the kind of the concept of the IAB actually goes back quite a ways. There was, I don't know, 10 years ago, I think there was the Association of Downloadable Media.
right.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the first attempt to create a standards committee, if you will, for podcast measurement. And it kind of fizzled out. So the IAB kind of rose out of the ashes of the ADM. And there's a whole bunch of different companies and organizations that are on the committee for IAB and try to come up with, a standardized way to track, podcast downloads. And the only companies that I know of off the top of my head that are actually IAB compliant are Libsyn, Blueberry, and Podtrack. I don't know if any of the other, kind of known providers out there are.
And I would say one of the keys is that they already were before these stats. I mean, you had the Association from Downloadable Media, but Blueberry, Libsyn, but they already were putting the effort. It's all about filtering, right? And when we talk about filtering, people don't know what that means, but a download is not just a download.
Yeah, there's some really odd things that can happen when, a device, whether it's a smartphone, a web browser, what have you, goes to, quote, download a media file. It may make a number of requests to actually get all of the data that's included in that file. And if your stats were based on, every time a single IP address or what have you goes to download that data in chunks, well, if you counted every one of those as an actual download, that would massively inflate your numbers. So the IAB works to kind of create these filters so that the stat companies are making sure that, okay, that is only one device that's downloading that, even though maybe the device sends through 5, 10, 50 requests before it actually gets the entire file, because ultimately everybody hopefully wants to have actual accurate numbers that truly represent the audience and not just inflation for the sake of inflation.
Right. And for me, the most important part is that Blueberry, Libsyn, and Podtrack, they understand this.
Yes.
And they are podcast companies who get it, and they're working to actively to do the proper filtering to measure them accurately. You want to know, right? People are going to be disappointed when Apple stats come on because it's going to be reality. And so who cares? Like, who cares what the number is? Take that number and build on it, right? So, okay, so you rewind. You had 500 before, and now you have 400 people who actually listen to 75% of the podcast. So what? Like, awesome. You have 400 people who listen to 75%. Make it better, and now make it grow back to 500. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? A number's really just a number.
I wonder how many companies and such are going to stop seeing the importance of a download metric from Libsyn, Podtrack, Blueberry, anyone else who implements the IAB standards, because with Apple releasing stats, everyone's going to flock to that and see that as this is the golden standard because this is attached to a user, anonymized, yes, but it's attached to a user so that if it's the same Apple ID account on your iPad, on your iPhone, on your iPad mini, on your iPod Touch, it's all tracked as one person and the consumption is tracked. So
they still have to filter all that. I hope they do. We don't know that they're going to do that accurately.
They might not need to filter it. That's the thing, is that because their filter is the entry point, the app itself. Right. So like the kind of filtering that Blueberry and these other companies have to do is bots, it's multiple IP addresses from the same device, it's networks that download from the same IP address where there are maybe 100 completely different users on the same network at an office or college or something, and so they're downloading. So that's the kind of stuff these download metrics providers have to filter for. Apple doesn't have to because they have the direct connection to an anonymized but specific user.
The key for me is, like, I don't care where you get your stats. Like, if I was from an advertiser perspective, what I would make you show me is 2 sets of stats. show me your Libsyn numbers and your Blueberry numbers. Like, it doesn't mean much to me coming from one place. Do those match, right? And do they meet IAB standards, which is a good metric because we know they're trying to do that. Do your Apple, Apple, it's all part of the equation, but it can't be everything, right? So bring in your Apple numbers and compare it to your Libsyn numbers, and then make some calls based on that. The two.
The Apple number is going to have an asterisk as well. I haven't checked in a while. What percentage does Apple have listener-wise? Is it
dropped, but it's still
like 60 to 70%?
Yeah, so it's a big chunk. Absolutely nothing to sneeze at. But it's going to have to say, which I guess at that point you can say the majority of my listeners, here's that kind of thing. And that's where if Google would ever, get their act together, I don't know that they would ever whittle away at that, but it'd be nice if they even tried.
And considering that it is a majority audience, it's probably also a good representative majority. We often quote from Edison Research in their studies that they do, and they do all of this hard work to try and make sure that they have a statistically representative portion of Americans. So they survey 1,000 or 2,000 people, and from that, they extrapolate to say, well, based on this representative, statistically valid, whatever their actual term is,
statistically significant. That's what I use. I'm a sociologist, so I come from this world. So that's why it's important to me that it's a number that you can extrapolate statistically and apply to other things. But that's why I'm saying don't take it for everything.
Yeah, so from 1,000, they get the entire population of the U.S. And I think, though, we're looking at a majority audience using a podcast app. Yeah, not the best podcast app, sure. And yeah, it's only iOS devices, and you could make different assumptions to say, well, maybe Android users are so nerdy about their podcast that they listen to the entire thing, or maybe they're so disconnected from podcasts that they drop out after 2 minutes if they get bored. I don't know. You could look at conditions like that, but still knowing generally 60 to 70% of your audience, how they consume it, that could be really helpful to make decisions if you want to.
Do you think podcasters are going to push people now to listen in the podcast app?
They already do.
They already do. Yeah. I mean, because they want to be new and noteworthy, Dave.
Yeah, they want to rank.
And they want to rank better. I mean, whatever. That stuff will never stop. It's fine. I think the important thing is what, you guys have already said. What do you use your stats for? And it's to look for trends, right? All this stuff is still going to be, it's also going to come back to the same thing. Am I making content that people are listening to? Well, is it more downloads? That's what we're looking at now. Now it'll be listened to longer, right? Or, am I giving, Dave, you're always talking about that don't make it any longer than it should be, right? We're talking about episode length. People are like, how long should I make my episode? And you're like, as long as it needs to be. So, if you made a 15-minute episode and the majority consumed most of it, you're holding their attention. If everyone's bailing on your 30-minute podcast at halfway through, there's probably a reason. Something in the other half just isn't landing with the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look at your trends, right? For any of this. Am I trending up? Or at least am I not just falling off a cliff where I can be like, something went wrong, right? But as podcasters, we always want to grow a little bit.
And there are those times when that you're going to lose people at a certain thing, but you still decide to do it anyway because it fits in. It's like, I'm sure Dave and I both probably lose a certain percentage of our listeners whenever we refer to our Christianity. And that's a thing. We've accepted that. Right. And I know that when in my Once Upon a Time podcast, when there's a moral issue on the TV show and I decide I'm going to comment on it, I know I'm going to get feedback. I know I'm going to get some negative reviews. I know I'm going to lose some of my audience. But telling the full story and being authentic and sharing the message that I think needs to be shared is more important. I'm not really saying it's more important than one person out there, but it's more important than
it's more important than being popular is what it is. It's more important than that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I lose a listener to my other show every time I do this damn show because someone discovers that, hey, wait, I think they said Dave and Daniel both have a show like Ray's and it's regular. So then like, they don't listen to that show anymore. Like, right. So like, who cares? Like, I mean, like whatever. And by the same token, I gain listeners, right? Dave will mention the Roundtable on School of Podcasting or Daniel and we gain a listener to the Roundtable. So, just take it in stride. I mean, Stephen, do you worry about your stats versus, doing something? Do you ever do anything in your show you think, that's going to cause me to lose listeners? There's I hope this gains listeners, but what about losing listeners?
Fellas, we at the Heartland Running Podcast are on a mission. We're looking for that first piece of hate mail or bad review. We've got a party set up, ready to go.
Nice.
So we're trying to offend. But it's
you don't have a 1-star review yet? No 1-star review yet?
I probably shouldn't.
We could hook you up. Yeah.
I was going to say.
Worst show ever.
I'm looking it up right now.
But he's not looking up on his Apple Podcast app because he can't do a review there.
No, you can.
What?
They fixed it very quickly. They fixed it.
Wow. Just see, this is privately. This was brought up. Bill, this is news. So who cares about stats? We can do a review from the app.
Yeah. And the other fun thing, I don't want to derail off of stats. I found out today that when you share, it shares.
What? When you what?
When you share, like if you're listening to an episode and you click the share button, it sends them to your iTunes linking, not the page, not the website. It sends them to your iTunes thing. And I was like, well, that'll boost subscriptions.
Well, I think it's always done that.
Is it? Okay. Maybe I'm thinking of Overcast. That could be. All right. Well, never mind. No news. Fake news.
You're saying if I share a podcast from the app, like I tweet it out
from podcast app, it sends
the link will open up someone else's podcast app, right?
Yes, in theory. At least that's what I saw today. I didn't realize it wasn't new, so shame on me.
But we can do a review in the apps. What you're saying, Daniel?
Yeah,
yeah, and it's now not only in the catalog, what everyone was used to before, but it is now from your subscriptions. You can write a review and leave a rating for the podcast you listen to. And you can also see people also listen to other podcasts. So like I looked at mine today when I did a webinar, and at the bottom of my own podcast, the Audacity to Podcast, the top 2 podcasts that say you might also like, you could probably guess, School of Podcasting, and surprisingly not Podcasters Roundtable, but Podcasters Studio.
That is surprising. I would have expected to be
Podcasters Roundtable is number 4.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay. So thank you, Apple, for listening to this show, because I've ranted about that several times. I've given you the idea countless times saying this is the single best way. It still was the best discovery engine. You guys want that discovery. And now that you can do reviews in the app, clearly your stats are going to go up, right? More reviews means more downloads. No, it doesn't. But anyways, that's really cool. I found it interesting that maybe that's what they meant. It said after a while, it learns what you like and it's going to make suggestions. I think it's that. It's the same old engine that iTunes has had forever. And again, it's the single best engine I've ever seen, because it does put shows in front of you. They're like, oh, I would like that too. Check it out.
And they might start using these new stats to help better make those connections. They may I think it's very reasonable to assume, and I don't have insider information on this, but it's reasonable to assume Apple may adjust their algorithm. May. I want to emphasize that, so don't quote me saying they will, but they may change their ranking algorithm to rank instead podcasts where people listen to the majority of the episode, or more people listen completely straight through this episode, something like that. I could very easily see them doing that, because after all, that's the way YouTube works. And that's one of the reasons, very small soapbox here, that's one of the reasons I'm so against putting fake video on YouTube, which is where you put only audio in just a screenshot or something like that in YouTube, is because that audience retention is horrible. It plummets within the first 30 seconds to almost nothing. And YouTube sees that, and YouTube bases their ranking of videos based on how long people watch the video. So if people pop out after only a couple seconds of the video, YouTube will see this is horrible, don't rank this. I think Apple could start doing something similar. Dave wants to say something.
Amazon is doing the same thing now with Kindle books. Where they're ranking it by how many pages were read.
From what I understand, I mean, something similar. Apple's already had like really good algorithms in place for their apps that just haven't applied it to podcasting, right? They've done probably, so they've got it. It's in the engine.
It really seems like Apple first puts things in the App Store, and then eventually those concepts trickle into podcasts, which is why I keep thinking they'll eventually allow podcasters to buy an ad inside the podcast app, kind of like you can in Overcast, because you can do that with the App Store. I think you'll be able to do that someday with podcasts.
Yeah. And in the chat, Bangs also says Apple can't make an IP. He says it doesn't seem there's no reason why Apple can't make an API call available to ISO app makers to let Overcast, ETL report their stats to Apple if the dev wishes. They are going to report back, right? Dave, you're going to get, or is it only going to be through Podcast Connect, or is Apple going to send these through to Libsyn as well? You know?
You just talked about two different directions.
All right.
So
my brain missed.
An API could go one way or the other. So what Baines is talking about is Overcast reporting back to Apple how much of an episode people consume.
That way. Okay. All right. I got you. I'm talking about the stats coming from.
Yeah, then there's
Apple,
the other way where
to,
Apple sends the stats back to Libsyn. So Libsyn can include your consumption analytics.
Yeah, because for that to work, because there are companies out there, Awsound, there are a couple other ones that are saying, we can show you how much people are listening to your show, but to do that, you have to use their player. Well, the minute somebody listens on Overcast or the podcast app or Pocket Cast or any of the other 8 million apps out there, that stat goes right down the toilet. So you end up again with about maybe the ones I've tested, it's like 1 to maybe, if you're doing great, 3%.
Right, but
those players are on your website.
Is Apple going to, those numbers that Apple are going to give, am I going to have to log into Podcast Connect, or am I going to be able to just go to Libsyn and get these numbers too?
I think at this point it's going to be Podcast Connect. You know,
Blueberry, Shawn?
Well, it'll definitely be Podcast Connect first.
Right.
Yeah. The only thing that I've heard so far is it's all going to be within Podcast Connect. If there's any talk of, them opening that up so that companies like Libsyn or Blueberry can then pull that information over into your stats, I haven't heard anything about that yet.
Because some companies, like Spotify, there were some companies that Stitcher, you used to have to go to Stitcher to get some stats, right? You don't get length of listen through what is sort of sent to companies, but you do get downloads, right?
Yeah.
You can see you can't see where they cut out, but you can see how far they made it through.
In Libsyn?
So in Stitcher, you mentioned.
Right.
Stitcher.
No, but I'm saying used to be Stitcher didn't send any numbers.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, they finally. There's only a few left. There's SoundCloud, Google Play Music.
I didn't even bring up the SC.
Yeah.
We didn't mention it as a good place to go and get stats.
No. It's a good place to go buy stats.
Dave and Shawn do support, and both the audible sighs and the head shaking are coming from those two. The circle gets the square.
So they're that bad? SoundCloud?
Yeah. Well, they've only lost almost 400 million. They've laid off 40% of their workforce.
Yeah, but the stats. Are the stats that
bad? Just Google the phrase "buy SoundCloud plays," and the last time I checked, you could get about 2,000 for $3.
Ooh, that's a good deal.
That's a good deal. I'm gonna go get some stats.
So now put yourself in the shoes of an advertiser, and you go, "Okay, great. Tell me about your downloads." And somebody goes, "Look, we have 10,000 downloads."
Right, because you can, if you're happy, you can fool yourself. That's fine. But we're talking about when you have to report to someone else, your boss, right? Maybe you're doing a podcast for your organization.
Yeah,
you want to make yourself look good. You're like, man, we are picking up numbers, and any smart organization will be like, oh, good. So when we do a call to action, how many people actually click the link? Not so many.
SoundCloud itself, I believe, about 3 years ago, they actually intentionally broke out web plays from downloads through RSS because they knew that those web plays were not legitimate. They were being gamed and bought and everything. So it's pretty much the direct acknowledgement right there that their stats are probably not that reliable. We mentioned Squarespace earlier and using third-party stats. You can actually, to SoundCloud's credit, very easily use a third-party stats tracker like Blueberry or PodTrack. So, I mean, I got to give them at least a little bit of credit for being open to that and, acknowledging that maybe people want actual podcast stats instead of whatever it is that they provide.
Yeah, that's good. And I mean, it comes back to the having a source to check it against, right? And that's cool. Right. It's good that they let you do that because you do, I think, want to have something to compare. Even for myself, I mean, because Blueberry, you can get the free version, right? So that's a great thing. PodTrack, those are great things to add in addition to, even if you have Libsyn stats, right? It's nice to compare something against something else to know
If you're
Please.
using Libsyn, you can have, and you want Blueberry stats, you just email support because you get a little link from Blueberry or PodTrack and just say, email support and go, I would like this added to my prefix. And it takes all of 15 seconds.
Oh, so it does it for you all the time?
Yeah, basically. So it doesn't matter. You'll see when you go get the direct link to an MP3, or if it's in the player, it's from that point forward, your entire back catalog is now going to be tracked by both stats.
This is just another reason. So I didn't even know that. And that's another reason why we talk about podcast companies that are doing things for podcasters who understand the space.
Right.
These two are competitors. We talk them all the time. Sounds like we're just total shills, but it's for a reason. It's because things like that. They're hooking you up with what you need as a podcaster. I think that's cool. So promo code? No, just kidding. I won't even tell you. All right. Well, we are reaching towards the end. Forget it. I'm going to keep going. Are there any stat myths? Daniel, you're big on myths. Do we have any myths about stats that you can think of? I kind of toss that off.
I'll let Dave go first.
Looking at your stats will not make them grow.
There's a lot of jokes there, Dave.
Yeah.
Anything you hear Shawn, anything you hear people talking about where you're just like, no, that's not right.
I think that the big thing I hear a lot is, well, I just released an episode, and this could be a matter of, I released an episode an hour ago, I released an episode 24 hours ago or a week ago, and why aren't my numbers as high as they should be? Or as high as I think they should be. And, if people get really pushy about that, we can act at Blueberry, we can do an audit. That really doesn't happen that often because usually there's a logical explanation like, oh yeah, you just released your last episode the day before Christmas or something like that. I mean, you can usually track that kind of stuff down to something explainable, but that one comes up a lot. As far as myths are concerned, I don't really know of anything specific. Obviously, we advise against all the usual stuff. Thankfully, it feels like Twitter bombing has kind of gone to the wayside. I feel like we haven't had to have a conversation about that in a while. Or someone will ask us, well, why can't all of my players autoplay? Why doesn't the media player autoplay? Why isn't there an option for that? And we have to explain to them, yeah, that's a really great way to inflate your numbers, and we don't believe in that, so we don't allow you to do it with our technology.
I think you do, because my numbers got really inflated, and it can only be. I'm still going back to my own personal issue there with my numbers. I'm not Here's the funny part is I don't believe my own numbers. I'm like, there's no way it's happening.
Emily,
I was going to bring that up. What is it, Dave?
Yeah, Emily from the storybehindpodcast.com says you can't get sponsors unless you have X amount of downloads.
That's a good one.
Month. We've proven that wrong.
Well, and that's my the other myth I see quite often is the downloads per time period, per day, per week, per month, whatever it is. It's a completely meaningless number, because I can tell you, here's the secret. I'll tell you how to, in a month, literally double your downloads in a month. Publish twice as many episodes. Boom.
Woo!
Your head probably exploded.
Baby.
And your audience doesn't even have to grow, and you can double your download numbers.
So what's important then?
What's important is you look at a single episode, not all of your episodes in a certain amount of time. It's you look at one single episode, and then you can look at that in a certain amount of time. But still, you have to take into consideration things like what time did you publish? Like if you're going to look at your episode today and you published it at 9 p.m., your downloads for today are going to be very low, but your downloads tomorrow will be really high. That doesn't mean that you should publish tomorrow. You have to let things smooth out. There's some term, I'm sure, normalize maybe, or something else. You have to let them even out, normalize or reach maturity before you actually trust what those numbers are, because it could be like the Christmas thing. What if you had a whole bunch of subscribers in Florida and those poor people are without power for a while and they don't have Wi-Fi. They're not downloading podcast episodes. They're not listening to them. Maybe you see a drop. Maybe they listen to your podcast afterward, or holidays, things like that. So you really have to let things settle before you can trust
what number
the
do I
numbers.
want to report then?
Ideally, your downloads for a single episode about 4 weeks after it's been published.
Oh, consistently. Like do that, get that number, and then for the like do that for the next 6, 7, last
Yeah,
year
and then
episodes.
average it out or so. Like
Yeah.
Dave said, you could put it on a spreadsheet and then track it that way, or just kind of keep it in your mind. It's something like this. Does it look like it's hitting the same number? So, and then you can average that out, because you will have the occasional home run episode, or maybe you get featured somewhere or something like that. Back in 2015, Stitcher featured the Audacity to Podcast a few times on their front page, and one episode got 75,000 quote downloads. But it was really just Stitcher. Every time someone listened to the 30-second excerpt on Stitcher, they were sending back a ping to the stats, which would then say this episode was downloaded. So I had to just ignore my Stitcher numbers for a few months.
Steven, is there any stat you wish you had? That's a tough question. Like, just come up with the top of your head, but is it
podcast related, right?
Yeah. Maybe not.
I think it would be nice to know how long people are listening, and hopefully with the new Apple stats, that'll happen. So, I mean, you need to make the show you want to make, but I also want to make a good show. So if I know people are, 45 minutes is about their threshold, I don't want to push it much beyond that. So I think that's going to be the most helpful one.
I would love to see how many people that was the first time they listened to the episode. Because you see like 2,000, let's say you have 2,000 downloads an episode.
You want uniques per episode.
Well, not so much uniques, it's just like how many of those listen are, you know what I mean? Like, how many people have been listening for years?
First time listener.
And how many people exactly, first time listener. First time, long time.
First time, long time.
Yeah.
I don't think you get that in not even YouTube.
No,
in theory, they should know if they've ever watched your channel. That's actually doable for YouTube.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And that could be interesting. That's an interesting stat.
I'd like to change my answer. I'd like that one too.
That one too.
We take your first answer. Sorry. We have the Jeopardy rules here.
Shawn, you kind of look like you had something on your brain there, but
no, I was just kind of going along with what everybody said. I really actually like Dave's idea. I think that would be really interesting data to have, to kind of look at your numbers and go, okay, this percentage of whatever episode was people who listened for the first time. I mean, sometimes you can kind of gauge that. You talk about if you have a big guest or something like that, where you're going to see a big inflation based on that, and you kind of know that a lot of those are people that are listening for the first time. But then it would also be interesting, kind of piggybacking on that, to see, well, how many actually subscribed and stayed on for 2 or more episodes. That would be a really interesting trend to have.
We always want people to subscribe, to rate and review, to share. I want to know how many people actually share, right? A good call to action is to get people to share it. So if there's a share option in that app, how many people are using it, and how do I get more people to share it? I'd like to know that. I still want my likes. How many people like my podcast episode? I want that.
Yeah, because one of the things that I now hear about is you are constantly getting new listeners, and you're getting people that leave, and then those people that leave come back, and then they leave, and then they come back. It's weird, because you'll talk to somebody that used to listen all the time, and maybe you mention something that was in a previous episode, and you can tell by the look on their face they don't listen anymore.
Yeah,
because they're not like going, oh yeah, and the thing with the thing, and you're like, no, they have no idea what you're talking. And then I've had people say, yeah, I don't know, nothing wrong with you, I just quit listening for a while, and then they came back. So that is something that I now realize is going on behind the scenes. You're losing and gaining people all the time, just because there's only 24 hours in the day.
Oh, people cherry pick episodes too, right? I'm sure. I mean, I bet the biggest, if Mark Maron could see those, I mean, I might listen to WTF like twice a year, because I see a guest. I'm like, oh yeah, I did want to hear that one, but I'm subscribed. I don't auto download, so I don't get that stat. But yeah, totally cherry picked. And as you said, Dave, 24 hours a day, like we all, well, at least people who listen to this show, I mean, I'll probably subscribe to a lot of shows, and doesn't mean you get to listen to them all. So it is interesting. Like, why did you pick one over the other? Right? Did the person's name in the title? Now we know that's correct. Did the person's name in the title versus the topic. And we're going through that at work. Like, you want to prioritize the interviewee because you know that people would listen cherry pick by name, or are they going to cherry pick by topic? I don't know. And you have limited space where you can put that information where it's going to appear in an app and make it easy. So
that's a great question.
Interesting stuff.
A stat I'd like to see is some kind of campaign tracking or source tracking. So I could know of everyone who's subscribed and downloaded, where did they come from? Did they find me because of search? Did they find me because of Roundtable? Or did someone mention me? That kind of detail, which I know that involves having to track them, and that is a privacy concern. So I'm not actually asking for it, but it would be cool if that could be seen. Probably never will be, though.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so good. There's room to grow in the stats. Although, again, we do. You approach that line of how much you're measuring somebody, and anonymously. And Apple has been big, to say that this is anonymous data.
If we could have a timer, like to the second, showing how much time we have left in our magical 8 weeks of new and noteworthy.
Oh yeah,
awesome.
Time is up. Oh, and it renewed again magically.
Oh yes.
How did that happen? All right. Well, I think we'll head on out. As we head on out, definitely let us know where we can find your podcast. If you have anything to add, go ahead and throw that in here. This is the part where our stats take a big drop. This is bad on me. I should not give any indication that we are going to end. I should literally hit stop broadcast in the middle of my sentence. And then that stat would be like, oh, I didn't even know they were leaving. It would just have completion rates would be crazy. I'm going to do that. It's just stop broadcast while we're talking. But anyways, we are heading out. The hardcore stay around. Thanks everyone. Emily in the chat, of course. Gabe Gonzalez checked in. And John Moore was in early. Mark from Australia. He's really, he traveled a long way.
The chat room is bailing already.
Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah, we're clear. We're out of here. We're winding down. We have no more value to offer other than our thanks.
Just remember, Iron Man's going to come out in a few minutes and recruit one of us to the Avengers. You'll want to stick around and see it.
That's right. All right. So thanks again, Daniel. Where do we find your show?
I'm Daniel J. Lewis from The Audacity to Podcast, and I'll leave you with this tip. Don't think about the stats. Think about the people. Think about the content you want to give those people, and make that content so good that you are the #1 podcast to those people.
Very cool. Dave?
Dave Jackson, School of Podcasting.com. I'm going to piggyback on Daniel's, and don't think about the people. Think about the person. Think about that one person that you're talking to. Yes. And again, give them content that's so good they have to tell a friend.
Yeah, those people staring right back at me as I stare at Dave's video, because he's got the pictures on the wall, which I've said before, and I can see Ms. Eileen. So she's one person. I think she listens to this show. So yeah, we give that tip as podcasters, talking to people about podcasting. Sometimes, the old tip is like, put a picture on your desk and talk to that one person, or, what I mean? I oftentimes think of one person, like a friend, and that actually helps you be even more natural. Even when you're thinking about the person, you can visualize one person or a couple people. It helps me be more me on the microphone. Whereas if you're just sort of behind the mic and you've got an outline, you're following it, it feels more robotic. I don't know. That's a good tip, I think, at least for me in my progress of being more just being Ray on the microphone, right? Because you change, you turn on the microphone, you start the recorder, you put headphones on, and it takes a little you out of the process. So Dave can just spin around and look at those people, and I think actually it does help. So good tip.
And you start talking like this.
Yes, Sunday Roundtable. I can't even fake it. Dave's got the radio voice. All right, well, Steven doesn't have the radio voice, but we got through our tech issues. And Steven, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure being on. Sorry, my microphone wasn't working right. You can catch us over at the Heartland Running Podcast. And Ray, I'm going to let my fan base know I was on this show. So fame and fortune will be yours very soon.
That's very awesome. I appreciate it. I should have got you involved a lot more so they would actually stick around. But tell them your best advice at the very end.
Boy, put me on the spot. If you're afraid of looking stupid, you'll probably never accomplish anything worth mentioning to anybody.
Nice. Dave likes it. No fear.
Preach on, brother.
There was a big product when I was like a teenager. All these shirts had "No Fear" on them. They were like really popular.
Yeah.
If you're old enough, you remember those.
Yeah.
No Fear. It's a good. It's I like it. All right, Shawn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ray. I think final thought that I have with regard to stats is simply obsess over your stats less, have more fun. And my name is Shawn Thorpe. The best way to find me on the internet is you can go to my personal website, which gets updated usually after I'm on things like Podcasters Roundtable, but it's got a list of everything else I do. You can find that at Shawn, that's SHAWN.MX.
Very cool. Thank you so much. And yeah, another good one. Make sure you go over to podcastersroundtable.com/guest. If you are still here, if you're the 2% on that chart, you're the type of person who would go over and sign up. So we want to see you on a roundtable. Make sure you sign up, and we will see you for 102. Waving out of here. See you guys.